There has been two main reasons. One is the conflict, which doesn't, the war doesn't exist anymore, and then development. The latter actually is ongoing and will be a factor of displacement and will continue to be.
Elles sont multiples lorsqu'on prend les cas du Congo, parce que tout le monde sait que le Congo est devenu depuis environ 2 décennies un pays où il y a des guerres à répétition. Et là où il y a la guerre, je pense que c'est l'expression la plus importante de la violence. Il y a des tueries, des assassinats, des viols des femmes, et ceci.
Chaque ville a sa spécificité et les facteurs dominants sont différents d'une ville à l'autre.
Ensuite, il y a eu une prolifération d'armes, même lorsqu'on parle de désarmement. À la fin du conflit, en tout cas, on ne réussit jamais à extraire du corps social toutes les armes qui ont été utilisées dans ce champ de violence. Alors, donc, du coup, le croisement de ces nouvelles compétences et ces armes qui circulent sont une source de violence.
Para nosotros la causa más importante es la institucionalidad, es decir, las reglas del juego, las normas que regulan la vida urbana y que regulan la relación entre las personas. Eso es lo que para nosotros genera una gran diferencia entre una comunidad que es violenta y una que no lo es.
Well, there's what can be understood as root causes, which are things like poverty and inequality, but then there's also what we're calling in the project proximate causes, which are things like the way in which government exercises its control in specific communities and is affected by things like nepotism and corruption.
I would say the most powerful underlying factor behind urban violence is inequality. So internationally, you tend to have higher levels of violence in very unequal countries and lower levels of violence in more egalitarian countries.
The other aspect is, I think, inequality and unemployment, the lack of jobs, the job crisis that India is facing, not having adequate jobs, and a bulk of the population working in the informal economy, which has very little returns, very low returns, absolutely no social protection.
Nosotros enfatizaríamos el problema de exclusión social, que tiene dos vertientes fundamentales. Una es que los mercados básicos, estamos hablando de mercado laboral, mercado de capitales, mercado de tierras, fallan. Y la segunda es el Estado, que debería de alguna manera completar o intentar de neutralizar esos fallos, también está fallando y está abandonando a la gente. Estamos en el peor de los mundos posibles, el mercado falla y el Estado abandona.
Creo que complementando la idea que viene derivado de eso, lo que se produce justamente es un proceso de empobrecimiento, de desempoderamiento de la población ante las necesidades que tiene que cubrir, y ese desempoderamiento llega incluso hasta no tener los recursos para poder enfrentar de manera apropiada las situaciones de exclusión, y se encuentra también ante un Estado que no crea las normas apropiadas de convivencia y de superación, y se busca entonces soluciones como la migración, la violencia.
We looked about 5 or 6 months ago at a small city, that's Kadoma, and we found people who were living in quite poor conditions saying that it wasn't poverty, it was about cohesion, it's about the way in which you would relate, into your community. Yet there were other areas where there were very significant problems, and there were high levels of violence. Very often when there was contestation over limited resources, to our surprise, we discovered that women were fighting at boreholes over access to water. And what's most disturbing is that these were people who 10, 15 years ago would have had ordinary tap water coming into their homes. Now there's been a collapse of services, and this is now producing contestation.
Okay, we know that there are several causes, but we can identify, for instance, the lack of opportunities, the lack of employment, and the future expectations that can cause some violence at the city.
Yes, as Teresa mentioned, there are many interrelated causes of violence, and what we're looking to do is to understand some of the lesser examined causes. So looking at masculinities, or how forms of what it means to be a man are constructed, and similar with women, what it means to be a woman differs between men and women when it comes to experiences of violence, use of violence, and what we're especially looking at is what factors influence non-violent trajectories or pathways of violence in urban settings.
Of urban violence are much the same as violence everywhere, and there's a biological, behavioural component and so on. But I think what sets Cape Town apart is that there's been rapid urbanisation. And if you add that to a country like South Africa, where there's already an existing legacy of violence from apartheid and separate development, it just compounds the situation.
I think it's a very difficult question. The causes of crime and violence being so many and so complex. But from what I have experienced and observed in the Cape Town or South African context, it seems to be strongly related to inequalities, and inequalities in the way that people access opportunities and basic public services, and that seems to be leading to people frustration and feeling excluded and angry, and of course it's closely linked to other factors like political and historical. So it seems that in South Africa there is sort of like a culture of violence in a way, and it's also about actually being born and growing up in such a culture and context where maybe to your frustration that's the way you answer to it.